Welcome to What It Takes, a podcast built to provide valuable insights for people just like you. Here we discuss industry-specific details on what it takes to navigate a journey of professional success from those that have already done it. We're not here to be vague. We're here to get to the nitty-gritty of it all. And today we'll get to the nitty-gritty of what it takes to become a doctor with our guest, Caleb Epps. My name's Keaton Epps, and I'm here with my co-host, Tom Sizemore. Tom, tell us about Caleb.
Yeah, thanks, Keaton. Caleb, longtime friend, man. Glad you're on the podcast with us. Really appreciate it. Let me tell you a little bit about Caleb. Let's hear. He's from Wake Forest, hometown. He's got some interest in hanging out with his wife and 3 sons. No daughters yet. Maybe one on the way, right? Let's hear. Nonfiction: Guns, Germs, Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond.
Title.
One of your
Get
favorite
educated,
books.
Tom. It's
Sapiens by Yuval Harari. Sorry, never heard of these books. Although Guns, Germs, and Steel does sound interesting to me. I'll probably end up looking that up. I might not read it.
Isn't that like a huge history, like basically
Guns, Germs, and Steel? What is that, Caleb?
It's a very interesting book. It essentially answers the question of how peoples have moved throughout all of history and how they've ended up where they are today. It's very interesting.
Guns, Germs, and Steel. Because guns drive people to different parts of the world, right?
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
I get that. And then Sapiens by Yuval Harari. What's that one?
Very similar. It's how we've evolved as sapiens and how we are the way we are.
Okay.
One interesting quick tidbit about that book. So essentially, Neanderthals were thought to be not only smarter, but more athletic, more capable of surviving. And it's a miracle that sapiens outlived and outlasted Neanderthals. And the one reason that he gives in that book for why that happened is our ability to gossip. So we are able to gossip and essentially say, hey, I trust that dude over there. Like, he knows what he's talking about. So let's follow him and do what he does. And all of a sudden you could get 2,000, 3,000 sapiens moving in the same direction, whereas Neanderthals didn't gossip, didn't trust each other. So they could always move in small little bands. So through our ability to gossip and talk about each other, we out-survived and lasted the Neanderthals. So that's kind of his premise. It's very interesting.
Does he say gossip, or is it like collaboration? You know what I mean? Because that sounds like
backbiting, gossip and backbiting.
Holy cow. Okay. That's a pretty cool book. I might have to do the audio on that one.
Did you just say book?
Book. I meant book. That's exactly what I said. College football. So some more interest, college football. I know you're a big NC State fan on football, maybe UNC on basketball. We can talk about that later.
Don't forget BYU.
Oh my gosh. History podcast, History Hit with Dan Snow, Gone Medieval. Those sound interesting. You've always been a history buff. I know that. And then Echelon.
It's kind of what Peloton used to be. It's a cooler version of Peloton.
Okay. I'm following now. You got Courtney, your wife, married 10 years. She's trained in marriage family therapy. You went to BYU, or she went to BYU ECU. You've got your son, Seeley, son Stetson, and Sawyer, 6'4", 1.5. Whew. You're just as busy as I am in Keaton, man. Young kids at home. It's a blast. And they love playing tag, wrestling, jumping off things. Dude, they're boys, man. They're going to mess up your house. How many pieces of furniture have you had to replace?
Well, we're keeping them all, but they're all damaged.
Maintain. That's probably part of the doctor story, right?
Exactly.
Caleb lives in Chapel Hill, North Carolina right now. These are his degrees. So Caleb has a bachelor's in science from Brigham Young University, nutritional science, focus in nutritional science, master's in science from Columbia University in the city of New York, medical nutrition therapy, and then medical doctor from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Medicine. Let's hear your undergrad, medical school and residency. So undergrad was 2007 to 13, 2-year church mission in between. I know that, right? Your LDS like me and Keaton are. Got your master's 2013 to 14, medical school 14 to 18. Caleb did a lot of school, guys. He did a lot of school. Residency, so diagnostic radiology, 2018 to 2023. So you're in residency now, intern. The intern year was at Wellstar Kennestone Regional Medical Center, and then Marietta, Georgia from 2018 to 19, which you're coming to Houston here soon, are you? There it is. Yeah. Fellowship, pediatric radiology here in 2023 and 2024, Texas Children's Hospital, Houston, Texas, which have you made that move yet?
Nope, we'll be moving in June.
June. Oh, lovely. Nice 105 on move day.
Wait.
Maybe 110. That's going to be awesome, dude. Caleb's current title, his current position is Chief Resident. I'm going to butcher this. PGY 5, which is post-grad year 5 in the Department of Radiology at UNC Health.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, you did great.
Then did I? Thank you.
You did.
Caleb works so there's 45 diagnostic interventional radiology residents there that you work with, right?
Correct.
They're his subordinates.
They're his minions.
He's chief resident, right? Yeah, don't be bashful.
Yeah, you're chief resident. Own that, man, for sure. You've earned it. And then we did ask Caleb to put a little information on here on where will you be next and for what, and what job have you accepted after that. So obviously we know he's coming down to Houston, Texas to do that pediatric radiology, but signed a job contract to work as both a pediatric radiologist and general radiologist at Wake Radiology in Raleigh, North Carolina. I almost said Raleigh. I'm from the RDU area, and I almost pronounced my home freaking city wrong. Caleb, dude, that was a mouthful, man. I feel like you've done almost everything under the sun, and I just want to make everybody aware Caleb does have diabetes too, so he's done it all.
Right. Yep, that's right.
Right.
Yep. It's a very long journey you just outlined, but honestly, every step of the way feels different and exciting, and it all kind of until you actually look back at it, you don't realize how fast it's moving. It's pretty remarkable that we're almost at the end of it, almost at the end of the rainbow.
Does it feel like the end?
It does not, honestly. It feels like I should probably be in school for more time.
Okay.
Crazy.
This is a point we'll talk about later, but they call it medical practice for a reason, right? The human body, the things we're learning, it just doesn't stop, and its complexity and how much information you have to know. And so even next year when I start actually working and being completely independent, I'm nearly autonomous right now and independent right now, but I still have technical supervision. So when doctors finish residency or finish fellowship, then they're completely independent. Even then, it's many years of practice, of experiences, of fine tuning your work that it takes to really feel like you've kind of made it. So yes, in spite of finishing the technical training pathway, I still expect a lot more things I have to learn. I look forward to learning a lot more in the future. Is
there a required CE, or is it all kind of voluntary based to add merit to where you're at? Or, how does that work?
CE meaning continuing education, for those of you that don't know what CE is.
Exactly. So all the doctors you've ever gone to do participate in CME, continuing medical education. And it takes, but depending on who you're certified for, it takes a variety of requirements, but essentially most specialties will have to re-examine in about 10 years. Wow. So even if I graduate, I'll still be having to expect to take an exam in 10 years that if I fail, I won't be able to practice medicine.
So now you said that depending on kind of the field that you're in pediatric radiology. Is that because you deal with children too? Like there's a higher standard, or I'm just guessing. I'm literally throwing it out there. Like I'm just wondering, are you gonna have to test after 10 years because you deal with children, or is it really just the field that you go into?
It's the field you go into. So essentially, any diagnostic radiologist, regardless of if they're neuroradiologists or pediatric radiologists or chest radiologists, the ABR, the American Board of Radiology, is who certifies you. And so you have to take that exam. So it doesn't matter like my subspecialty, because I'm a board certified diagnostic radiologist, I have to re-examine in diagnostic radiology.
Hold on, break that down for me. You're board certified.
Board certified. That's
are there people that aren't board certified?
Hopefully none that you're interacting with.
Okay, good. Okay. I just didn't know if that was like another extra,
That's not extra. That's required to practice. Okay. Yeah, you should. That would be another theme of what I would talk about tonight. Is not all doctors are trained the same, and it's important and incumbent upon us as patients to look up our physicians' training and their credentialing, because it is very important to be board certified. So every specialist, whether you're an emergency medicine doctor or an OBGYN or a radiologist, we all have governing bodies. So for example, a surgeon has the American Board of Surgery, And they have outlined the specific things that are required for their surgeons to be competent. And so you want your surgeon to be certified by that body, that governing body, because you know that they have reached a certain level of competence. If your physician is not board certified, I would
raise the red flag and be like, whoa, hold on, guys.
Are there additional like merits you can add to your board certification? I know, for instance, I know the physical therapist I had worked with or shadowed before in the past, he had certain certifications that he was in the upper echelon of physical therapy, had been working in it for several decades and continued his studies and didn't have to be where he was, but he was because of the continued effort he puts in. So is there something similar to radiologists or how does that work?
There absolutely is. A lot of it has to do with academic physicians. So if you look at a physician's white coat, they'll have oftentimes lots of letters after their name, and it's very confusing. But what most of those are is like academic accolades that they've obtained. So, for example, in the radiology world, there's something called FACR, and what that is they're a fellow of the American College of Radiology. And so that's kind of like an added gold star that's not required, but it means that that physician has attained a certain extra level of training and expertise. There's also something that I'll probably be getting called a Certificate of Added Qualification. It's a CAQ. And so my CAQ will be pediatric radiology. So I'll be board certified in diagnostic radiology, and I'll have a Certificate of Added Qualification in pediatric radiology.
Sorry, Caleb, I didn't mean to cut there. So some of those certifications, those extras like the CAQ you mentioned, and I can't remember the other abbreviation, the F1, but are those extras you're doing outside of school, or are you able to get them within school?
That's all after your training. Yep. So that's all during your independent practice. And like I said, most of those are acquired when you are working in an academic setting. Mm-hmm. So most of those are like, you're also a professor of surgery or you're a professor of radiology. You're teaching, exactly. And you obtain enough research, enough body of work that you obtained the status of fellow of whatever the governing body is. So like I said, for radiology, it's the American College of Radiology. Mm-hmm. So FACR, fellow in the American College of Radiology. Or FABS, fellow of the American Board of Surgery. So these are just other things you can like look for at the end of your.
Well, how many doctors are out there teaching too? I mean, how many are running a full-time practice and
7?
There's 7. There's 7 nationwide. There's 7, and if you don't find them,
so this brings us to the point of what's the difference between private practice and academic, and it's a big difference. It's becoming a little more homogenous as we go along, meaning that the differences are becoming less and less. But essentially, the academic physicians are the ones at big academic institutions, University of North Carolina, Duke University. As you travel outside the area, Emory and near Georgia, and George Washington up in DC, Georgetown, and just all these big academic institutions. And those physicians are the minority. There's probably about 30 to 40% in academics, and the rest are in private practice. In radiology, that difference is wider. Only about 20% radiologists stay in academics, and 80% go to private practice. And a lot of that has to do with, truthfully, monetary compensation and vacation.
Yeah, for sure.
We can talk about in a little bit. But yeah, so essentially, all those extra accolades, that's kind of all in the academic world. And it's nice to have, but truly not needed, unless you have some very specific disease this particular physician is extremely well equipped to handle through their research and whatnot. But
your bio, your rap sheet compared to so far we've had, this is very different because we have very entrepreneurial minded people on, and that's what they've done. And their rap sheet was like, failed school, needed to make money, thought of business, boom. And I mean, they had obviously a bigger origin story than that. And we had an attorney on that. Now he barely doesn't need attorney work, and he runs 30 businesses, basically. And, so I think that just that's a credit to show how, because they're all doing well. Everybody we've had on is making really good money, but that shows and thankfully that doctors have that this is required, but the dedication, the commitment, the time period that your bio is that long, and their bio is, in our bio means Ham's bio is, I don't even know a hairline of it compared.
It's like a word. Maybe I think my bio says something like
School.
Tom Sizemore married to Catherine, and then Catherine's bio is like,
Yeah. Right. So by proxy, you have a great bio.
Exactly. Yeah.
No,
But anyway, yeah, by virtue of your bio, I think that speaks to just
Mhm.
compared to the short list we've had on, speaks to what a part of what it takes to become a doctor. It's no joke.
Which you mentioned earlier, not all doctors are trained or learn the same. How did you verbiage that?
Yeah. So yeah, not all doctors have gone through the same training, and you can't.
So give me that. Like, am I thinking like school? Like you didn't go to a good enough school, or you just weren't good enough program, or is it you're a radiologist, so you're very trained differently, and you're a general practitioner, and you're a chiropractor, and you're a foot doctor, and whatever.
So exactly on the most basic level, we as patients, consumers of healthcare, we really should at least know what kind of specialists we're seeing and what kind of training they've had. So, for example, our family doctors are great, but there are diseases that you probably need to go actually get followed up with a specialist. And so just knowing when to do that is an important difference. So, for example, if for my type 1 diabetes, I could go see my family doctor, or I could go see an endocrinologist who has done not only the 3 years of residency in family medicine or internal medicine, but they've done an additional 3-year fellowship in endocrinology where they've not solely, but largely managed diabetes. And that's two very different styles of managing, my diabetes, right? So that's kind of, that at the most basic level, that's what I'm talking about. You could also, yes, get into the nitty gritty about where they went to school, where they did their residency and where they did fellowship. And in general, you want to see just some, good known names. If you see, Bucksville, Montana,
yeah,
you don't go see them to get your gallbladder taken.
Wake Tech University, yeah, for sure.
Now there's a fine line, because certainly lots of good physicians have come from small community programs.
True.
But that's a factor you want to weigh when choosing doctors. So that's kind of what I mean.
Well, then tell me, is there a doctor I should steer clear of? Like, I'm not talking about like a person's name, but are you like, foot doctors,
chiropractors?
This is, and I don't hope I'm not burning any bridges on here, but
here it goes. If you're a friend of Caleb's, hit mute here. Skip forward about 5 minutes because we're about to bash on whoever he bashes on.
There are two that are kind of gray zones for me, and some people it works, and some people it actually can severely damage, and that's why it concerns me. One is chiropractors. They have a very specific niche of training, but oftentimes they kind of push the envelope of the scope of their practice, and then we see those patients in the emergency department, and I read their scans of their neck fractures and their dissection art.
Is that common?
It's not as uncommon as you would imagine. So
okay, that was a nice twist there. It's not as uncommon as you might think.
I have seen, at least in the last 2 years, I've seen at least 3 people that have come in with dissections of their carotid arteries because they were going to a chiropractor for manipulation.
Wow.
So dissections lead to strokes. They lead to long-term neurodeficits. So that's one. Chiropractor is a little bit of gray zone for me. And then what people typically term as, holistic or homeopathic medicine, you can have actually an advanced degree and have a PhD in homeopathy, which is
a bunch of baloney. No, I'm going to say it right now. You don't have to say it, Dr. Epps. I'll tell Dr. Epps right now. Homeopathic remedies are a complete joke. You know what, Caleb? You tell me if I'm reading this wrong. I'm going to take this cup here. Here's this cup. I'm going to take a complete drop of cold, the common cold, the virus. I'm going to drop it in here. I'm going to fill this full of water. Now I'm going to go pour this in the ocean. I'm going to stir it around, and I'm just going to keep stirring it. Then I'm going to take all that water in the ocean, and I'm going to somehow pour it into the Milky Way galaxy to dilute that so small. And then I'm going to take a drop and put it on your tongue and say, all right, this is medicine. That's ultimately what it is. You dilute the virus or whatever that symptom, whatever, the sickness is or whatever, let's say the common cold, into just an immense amount of solution, right? Into water. And they say the more diluted it is, the stronger it is.
So, I mean, I don't know if I would take it to that extreme.
It totally is. I'm telling you what, homeopathics are crazy.
I will tell you my main concern with it is, like I said, actually, strange enough, I have seen some patients where things like that work really well. And you're like, okay, keep doing it, whatever.
Placebo.
But there's no real governing body in that world, right? There's no American Academy of Homeopathy that, has these strict minimal competence guidelines and exams, and they haven't gone through, as Keaton mentioned, all that schooling, the whole training pathway. But dangerously, they've received a PhD, so people call them doctor. And so you show up at your doctor's office, with belly pain, and you expect to be treated. So to your question of which doctors would you steer clear of, those would be two that are kind of always been in the gray zone for me, and they have very particular purposes, and they can be useful in the right setting. But oftentimes, both of those sets will push the envelope of their scope of practice. So just be wary, be careful, do your research.
Yeah, I mean, chiropractic, like homeopathics are not big down here. I would say like holistic, you get kind of the more granola where, hey, eating healthy, but I think that goes beyond just like going to some witch doctor. It's more of like, hey, yeah, I tend to eat more whole grain and I try to eat more organic. I think it goes towards the holistic where you don't really need a PhD to tell me to eat healthy.
So we're
train our body healthy.
So we're 20 minutes in, and I think we've gotten some good things, but I want to kind of go chronologically.
You're cutting off my comment here?
I'm cutting off your Milky Way dilution.
I was getting there.
And the C.
I know. Well, and what we've done, right, is we're so far into like, Caleb, we're at like the end of your journey. Yeah, we need to rewind.
So right? Tell us, and we talk about origin story. When did you first know you wanted to be in medicine?
So Tom mentioned having type 1 diabetes. So I was 18 years old when I was diagnosed, which was old enough to actually kind of be interested in my own health and my own disease process and kind of my own treatment. So I think that's kind of where it all started. And diabetes, in particular type 1 diabetes, is such a, you don't take a pill for it, right? It's a whole lifestyle that is required to manage the disease. So I think that's really what got me interested in it. Through learning about my disease process, I learned about the pancreas, I learned about insulin, I learned about glucagon and glucose metabolism. And then I could actually kind of live that. Like, oh, okay, if I eat this type of food, my sugar goes way up and I feel terrible. And if I take this much insulin, I can correct it. And here are kind of some of the side effects of, too much insulin and not enough insulin. And so just through that whole process, and it was a long process, I gained a real interest and a real desire to not only learn more about that for my own personal health, but actually be able to help others. So that was probably the origin.
I was really thinking, and I don't think I mentioned this yet, but Caleb is my brother. I was really thinking and hoping your origin story would have been some inspiration your little brother gave you at some time, at 10 years old,
No,
hit you in the head with a rock and like, oh man, try to stitch somebody up or whatever. But I guess not. I guess it was all yourself and self-driven. So that's fine. Whatever.
Self-driven.
No, I'm just kidding. That's great. That's a pretty cool story. I know you. So had you ever thought about it before your diabetes? Had you thought about career choices?
Yeah. Were you 16 at high school going, I'm going to be a doctor?
No, I was.
You were going to be an NFL kicker. That's what you were going to be.
I was still hoping I was going to grow about 5 more feet and be able to be good at sports.
Yeah.
No, I think vaguely I knew though that I wanted to enter a profession. So there's jobs, there's careers, and then there's professions, and kind of the root of that word profession is profess. Like I knew I kind of wanted to do something that would earn me money, would earn me a good living for my family, but also that had a little bit of a higher meaning to it. And so I didn't know what that was, but I knew vaguely I kind of wanted to enter into one of these professions. And obviously, when I was a teenager, kind of the major professions that I knew of were teaching, law school, and lawyer, and physicians. I've since learned there's lots of ways to have a profession, but yeah. So I think vaguely I knew that's what I wanted to do, but definitely I didn't know when I was 16 I wanted to be a doctor.
So what were first steps, right? You're great. You get type 1 diabetes. I know on your bio, right, you mentioned serving that 2-year mission for the church. So you go on your 2-year mission, you come back, go to school. Are you doing your undergrad with the intention of headed towards a specific profession, or did it take you till the end of your undergrad to make that decision?
Yep. So my freshman year, I did not do very well academically. I did not do well with my GPA, did not do well with my grades.
Were
So
you goofing off? Is that why, or what were you doing?
I had a high
Like
school
looking back now, what were you
in
doing?
North Carolina.
Okay, high school. Okay.
So were you trying? You felt like you were trying, but
So no, that was
the
problem.
public education system failed you, or what?
I wouldn't say it failed me, but it enabled me. I felt like I could scoot through school, right? Like, in high school, I would just show up, I would just take the test. Somehow, I just was able to know it, and it was simple.
When you were taking like AP classes, and you're like, "What? Freaking got an A+ on that U.S. history exam."
But then you get to a major university with very smart people, and then all of a sudden you realize that you can't just do that anymore. You can't just show up. You have to actually read the textbook. You have to actually learn the material. It took me that first semester to kind of get punched in the mouth.
How'd that first semester go? Was it like a 2.0? What was it?
I can't. It was above a 2.0, but it wasn't much further.
I think if I remember right, I think you had like a 2.8, and I had a 2.9 my first semester. So I was like, yes. Like
mine was 3.4, but I went to basically a community college. So.
I feel like that is a detail you would remember, but I didn't feel like it was much more than a 2. I felt like somewhere 2.2 or 2.1.
Really? I swear it was a 2.8. But yeah. But there was lesson learned for you and for those entering into their undergrad. What can they take from what you didn't know in that first semester?
Yeah, so kind of the overarching theme is medical school is getting more and more competitive. It was competitive when I went in, but it's gotten to competitive to the point where you almost are going to be expected to take a gap year. And I can talk about that in a minute too as well. My gap year essentially was that master's degree from Columbia University. So I went in with a very low GPA. I can't remember exactly what it was, but then I went on my mission. And during your mission, you meet a huge variety of people. I met actually a part of that. I met a lot of physicians, and essentially, I told them how things were going at school, and they essentially said I need to get my act together. So when I returned, I really did. I really didn't do much other than studying and working out, and then met Courtney, and she went on her own mission, so that gave me a little bit more time. But yeah, I didn't do a whole lot else other than studying. So as far as what it takes in the undergrad period, there's a few things. Kind of nitty gritty is there's a set curriculum. All pre-medical students have to take the same courses. Now you can choose a major that includes a lot of those courses. So they kind of double dip, so you kind of get credit towards your major and toward your pre-med curriculum or requirements. So I chose nutritional science, and Tom asked me, what did I do first? So I actually went to my counselor and I said, what major is going to help me fulfill these requirements the fastest? And I still don't know to this day why she told me this, because I was one of very few that actually did this major. I think maybe thought I actually wasn't going to make it and I should do this. That major was nutritional science. And I was like, okay, let's do it. So I signed up. And then, like I said, it took me a year and a half to realize, like, this is a really small group of people. And the pre-med group at the university I went to at BYU was massive. And I'll talk about that in a second. So that was the very first step, picking a major, planning out how you're going to accomplish all the pre-medical school classes so that you can be done with them in time to apply. And so how you do that, you talk to your counselors and you talk to the pre-med people around you. That was huge for me. I talked to people that were just a year ahead of me, every phase, every stage of this process. Even now, I'm talking to the people who work at Wake Radiology. I'm like, hey, what's it like? So that was huge. But going back to this idea of the pre-med group. So at BYU, the pre-med group is extremely competitive and cutthroat and very smart. And this I almost naively went into. So one of these courses that's kind of famous, these are called weeder courses, right? Because they weed out those who really don't want to be there. And I'm not saying weed out people that aren't smart, because I wasn't smart. But if you really want to be there, you can figure it out and you can get through these courses. And that's kind of what I did. So on my very first organic chemistry, that was the exam. On my very first organic chemistry exam, I got a B-. And I worked my butt off at B minus. I was extremely excited. And how it worked at BYU is you had a testing center. So it was one building that everybody went to, and a bunch of tests were administered there for all different classes. And you take your test, and a lot of times it was multiple choice, and you put it through the scanner, and then you walk downstairs. There's a big screen that
Did I pass?
all the scores. And it's so funny. It's all supposedly anonymous, right? Like it's just it's like your ID number. But the pre-med group, like we all knew each other's ID numbers because we all took all the same courses together. And we had all
yeah.
exams. We kind of knew what everybody was getting.
And you said it was a small group, right?
No,
the pre-med is massive. That's right.
Yeah, my major was smaller, but this was pretty large. But you still kind of got your own circle of 20 or 30 people that you were all in the same classes all the time. And I'll never forget, I was so excited when I saw that B minus, because in my mind, if I could just stay above a C, if I could just keep in the A's and B's, I'd have a shot at getting into medical school. And so I was so excited about this B minus. I'll never forget one of these other guys that I got to know pretty well kind of came over and saw it and put his arm around me and said, "Oh, you'll do better next time. I'm sorry." Are you freaking kidding me? So that gives you an idea of the I guess level and type A personality and kind of cutthroatness.
Was he rubbing it in, or was it
very sincere? And
he was thinking a B minus was like, dude, I'm really sorry, you just blew your whole chance.
Exactly, and that's how they all thought. And I slowly started to realize that, and I freaked out a little bit. But I don't know what it was. I'm glad I just stuck it through. I think I had enough backup plans. I was like, okay, if it doesn't work, I'll be fine, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And so I did. I went through all the Wiedrich courses, and the worst grade I ever got was a B minus, sometimes extremely close. And sometimes I had to do a little bit.
A worse, like final grade or test grade?
Final grade. Yeah.
Okay. And so you started out with, well, I don't know about started out, but it seems like you started out with the B minus. What did you change to be able to notch it up from that and have that be your low point?
Yeah. So going back to the thing of me not being very smart, but I could read people well. And I felt like that was a skill I learned on my mission. I finally figured out that each class kind of had a secret way of, succeeding, be it, for example, the second organic chemistry class I took, I finally figured out that at the end of each book chapter, there was about a 3-page summary that had all the important reactions, had all the important principles of that chapter. And so literally 4 days before the test, I would start and I would memorize all 3 pages. I'd memorize all the reactions. I'd memorize all the formulas. I'd memorize all the principles that were like bulleted out. And I did this by there's 2 big whiteboards in one of the office spaces I had as a TA. And I would just sit there and I just write. It took me about 30 minutes at first because it was so long. And I'd always have to look back, like, oh, I missed that or I got that wrong. And so I'd erase and I'd start over.
So you got to a point where you could almost write all 3 pages without looking at it.
Well, I did get to that point. So I would go.
Oh my gosh.
So I would go into the
testing. That's wild to me.
And the first 15 minutes of testing center, you could always bring blank paper and a pencil, whatever. Mm-hmm. So the first about 20 minutes or so of my exam, it would just me being there writing out the entire textbook chapter.
People are looking over you like, what is this guy doing? It's a multiple choice.
It's like, because you only have a certain amount of time too. So
yeah.
So I'd have this, and then I'd go through the test, and I could look back to these notes, and it just made it so much easier. And it actually did pretty well, and actually learned. So each class I learned kind of had that little key to it. And so
how did you learn that? Just you picked up on it naturally? I know you said you could read people. Were there certain people you were talking to? Did you talk to professors? Did you talk to TAs? How did you learn that?
Yeah, exactly. Professors and TAs. And I learned that, if I knew what was in the back of that textbook summary, I would be able to get, 80 to 90% of the questions right. Because I knew that's what they relied on to write their question.
Oh.
So, and that's just one example. Each class had kind of their own little subtleties. So if I were to, and this is for those of us who are actually not, naturally intelligent. So if you're trying to become a doctor, as far as what it takes, it really just takes creativity, ingenuity, and you can go a long ways with that.
And grit. It sounds like
Oh,
grit.
yeah.
I mean,
lots of hard work.
yeah, lots.
And because you did a story you might not get to here, but what it takes, part of what it takes. I was on my mission, but this was the time of Jimmer mania for you sports fans in BYU basketball. And our brother-in-law almost had a heart attack. He had an extra seat or ticket or whatever. It's a huge game, San Diego State, who was ranked, I think at the time, high in the conference. And so was BYU with Jimmer Fredette. And he invited Caleb, and Caleb said, I can't. I'm in the library, basically. And my brother-in-law and me, I heard the story on my mission and almost died. Like, how in the world?
Stop. You're going to make Caleb cry again. He's going to start crying.
I was getting newspaper clippings, like saying how awesome this time was. And I was basically pissed at Caleb that he didn't go to that. And I was moons away in a whole different world and mindset.
But that's what it took.
That's
dedication.
That's what it takes. And you said describe a little bit too. You keep describing or mentioning naturally intelligent people and how you weren't one of them. Describe those different types of people.
Yeah. So again, we're kind of in the undergrad realm, and we can talk more about med school and how that goes. But those kind of people would be in the lecture. They would hear the principle once, and they would just get it, and they'd be able to apply it to all different scenarios. They'd be able to, talk about it, intelligibly, and they just got it.
So those people, you're out there competing against those people.
Those are the people I'm competing against. So that's kind of what I'm talking about by that. They just got it, and they could probably have gone to the Jimmer Fredette game and been fine. Maybe they would have gotten an A- instead of an A+, but they would have been fine. But yeah, no, I needed to be in there and hacking away at memorizing those textbooks.
Digging and scratching and just fighting, man.
So part of what it takes is knowing yourself. And I'm sure it's really hard to not compare or not be dragged down in envy, maybe, because I know I'm not like that. I barely took anything from lectures ever, unless it was something I was super interested in. So to know there's people out there like that you're competing against, you have to, what it takes for you, knowing yourself individually, you have to work that much harder. You have to study that much harder. You have to spend that much more time with professors, TAs, peers that are doing really well in the class or already have done well. So knowing yourself sounds like it's really important to be able to be successful in preparation for med school.
Massively. Yes, absolutely. Knowing yourself, and then not getting bogged down in comparison, because just that's how somebody else learns. That doesn't mean that's how you're going to do it. Yeah, exactly. So that's undergrad. So you go through all those courses, you figure out your way through the Wiedrich courses, and you should always remember, if anyone's listening to this is in the midst of this,
no one is right now, but one day, hopefully.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't use any of that. I don't use OChem. I don't use, physical chemistry. I use anatomy. That's fair. But all like the nitty gritty Krebs cycle and, oxygen metabolism and all that kind of nitty gritty stuff, it's just weeding you out. And it's so frustrating.
Do the professors get it, or are they empathetic to their students? Are they like, hey, I know it's stuff that you may never, ever have to recall again, but we have got to learn and study, or are they just cutthroat too?
No, many of my professors were just so jaded. So when I talk about the pre-med class being big, so most of these courses have about 300 to 400 students, and you're in a big auditorium, and they're up there, and you're just like scribbling away your notes, trying to figure all this out. So that's the kind of not that they're not empathetic, but they just don't have the bandwidth to mentor 300 or 400.
They're not teaching 10 kids. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. It's a lot on you. Not to say, and they did a good job. But yeah. So make your way through the Wiedrich courses, and then near the end of your undergrad, you have to take the MCAT, and that's a whole nother thing.
I remember you studying for that.
Well, before we get into that, because I definitely want to dive into that, but what GPA did you finish with? I
finished with a 3.5. Yeah.
What would you
brought that up? Nicely done.
Competition. I mean, what? And you said it's spiked since then. It's even since then. What are you looking for to get into school of your choice or close to it now? What do you have to have?
Well, I will tell you, most of I hate calling them competitors, but honestly, everyone's trying to get into med school like that. It is what we were. Most of them had 3.8 to 4.0 But I was extremely thrilled with that 3.5. And based on who I had talked to, I felt like that was good enough because I had some other things. You can do research, you can do volunteering, you can really buff up your resume with other things. Just so if I could get just enough a good enough GPA to not hurt me, then I felt like I was gonna be good. So 3.8 to 4.0 is what most of my competitors have. I would say in today's market, you could still probably get into medical school with the 3 and above. You'd have to have a buffed up resume with other things, research, volunteer experience.
Yeah, how much weight does that hold to Keaton? I know Keaton was probably gonna ask the same thing, but how much weight does the other beef mentality on your resume, how much does that give you?
And how do you get it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's again just kind of talking to people, getting involved. So I'll share a couple of things that I did. So I also volunteered in a research laboratory with Dr. Tori Parker. He was a nutritional researcher, and we worked on antioxidants with grapes. Keaton probably remembers my family joking around about me publishing a paper about grapes, chocolate smoothies. So that was that. So I volunteered in the lab, and I got my name on a paper. And I was actually first author on the paper because I wrote it and then submitted it. So that's a huge golden ticket. So that's something big time you can do to buff up your resume is actually publish a research paper. Another thing I did is one of my jobs, I worked as a certified nursing assistant, which for any of the listeners that don't know what that is below a nurse. You are the assistant.
Assistant to the nurse. That's great.
And that's about as low in the medical world as it gets. And so and I have immense respect for all CNAs and all the CNAs at our hospital. I always say hi and talk to them, get to know their names. Because what they do is the real dirty stuff. They wipe, they do the wiping, they clean up the throw up, they feed the patients that can't swallow, they do all this kind of stuff. So I worked in a nursing home as a CNA. So that was another thing that you can do to buff up your resume is work in some sort of capacity where you have interaction with patients. And there are lots of jobs out there. One that I didn't know about that I wish I had known about was a scribe. So you can work in an emergency room as a scribe where you go in with the doctor and the doctor asks the questions, hey, what brought you in today? Where does it hurt? And you just type it all out and you write out the note. That's an excellent way to get kind of patient interaction, get paid, and have it look really good on your resume.
And good experience. I feel like that'd be good experience to your doctor.
So research, jobs, and then volunteering is kind of the other big one you can do during undergrad. And that's so what I did is I volunteered at a diabetes clinic. I felt like I had kind of a good in with that. And I actually set up a system to call back patients after their visits, 2 weeks after their visit, to kind of follow up and essentially say, hey, the regimen that, Dr. So-and-so changed for you, how's that going? How are you feeling? And kind of take notes on that. So I kind of set all that up for them. And then here's the big thing. Here's the last thing is letters of recommendation are huge. So if you can get a letter of recommendation that says, I worked with this guy, he set up this system where he would call back my patients 2 weeks after their visit, and he would help me know if it was working or help me know if it needed to be changed. Seeing that on a piece of paper tells you lots of things about the applicant. So if you can get name on a research paper, get a job where you're interacting with patients, and then volunteer, and from that volunteer work get a really good letter of recommendation, that can outweigh a poor GPA.
I feel like you're having to paint a journey with that resume, right? You're having to show I'm committed to the future of medical school because medical school, from what you described earlier in this podcast, is a journey, right?
Yeah.
From not only the studying but to the practicing to the residency. You're really trying to outline, here's my journey. I'm successful already in my journey. Please maybe turn a blind eye to that 3.3 or 3.5 GPA. I'm committed to the journey.
Yeah.
That's
right.
Great nitty gritty stuff, Caleb. Thanks for sharing. So
one more question related to that though. How did you make the time? How would you advise people to make time for all of that? Because you're already overwhelmed with classes and studying and tests and exams and trying to retain everything. And now you're volunteering your time. You're not even getting paid for some of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have children at the time, which now looking back boggles me how I feel like I had more time than ever. I don't know how that was even a problem. But it goes back to Keaton's, example of missing the basketball game. It's just priorities. I missed a lot of group activities, things that my friends were doing because I had to go, quite frankly, wipe butts at my job until 10. But yeah, it's just sacrificing other things.
Good on you, man. Wow.
So at this point, you did it. You graduated from undergrad. Yeah. But that is, I mean, from your rap sheet, your bio, that was like, I don't know, almost seemed like the easy part.
That was a decade ago.
Yeah.
Right.
Longer. Yeah.
Right.
13. Yep.
So tell us about you did all these things. You gave us a great what it takes, what you need to get into med school. Tell us about your first round of submissions and applications and acceptances and denials.
Yeah. That's the great mystery of the medical training is it doesn't ever get easier. You think, oh, once I get into medical school, I'm set. I'm done. Oh, but then you get to medical school and you're like, holy smokes. Like, okay, once I get a residency spot, okay, I'm set. I'm done. And you're like, oh, I got to get into fellowship. Like, oh, okay, once I get a fellowship spot, I'm done. And it's just like, it just never stops. So yes, it does get harder, but all the basic skills you've learned on each step of the way just build on each other. So, okay, so you've made it to medical school. So now you have 4 years of medical school. Traditionally, the first 2 years are what we call preclinical, meaning you're in a classroom, you're taking notes, you're listening to lectures, you're taking exams regularly. And it's extremely, it's brutal. It's a lot. Everyone always compares it to drinking water out of a fire hose for 2 years. And that's what it feels like. Just so much information, and the information just keeps increasing. And unfortunately, the running joke of those 2 years is that half of what they're teaching you is false and the other half is useless, because you enter your third and fourth year where it's your clinical years. And this is where you actually get onto clinical teams and you start taking care of patients. And you realize, oh yeah, they're right. Like any of this stuff in the first 2 years. Like, how do you handle a patient that refuses to take their medication, punches the nurse and runs away? Like, you're just like,
I haven't been trained for this.
So yeah, those first 2 years are preclinical years. And at the end of those, you take your first of your national examinations. So these are called USMLE Step 1. There's Step 1, Step 2, and Step 3. In order to get licensed, you have to pass all 3 of these exams. So you take the first one after the end of your second year, and that one also kind of determines what kind of doctor you can be. So it's a high pressure, high stake exam because it has a score. Actually, not anymore. It's pass fail. But when I took it, it had a score associated with it, and that score determined what kind of specialty you can get in. So it's
like an aptitude test, kind of?
Wow.
Kind of. This is going to scare a lot of people, but essentially, the lower score people would go into like family medicine or emergency medicine.
Catherine, we got to hire Caleb as a doctor.
And the
Dr. Epps is it.
And the higher scores, you would need a really high score for like neurosurgery, or crazy enough, dermatology is extremely competitive.
Really?
Radiology is like kind of just underneath that. So you still need a high score for radiology. So this is a very high stakes exam, because if you want to be a neurosurgeon, but you don't do too well in that exam, then.
But how do they know now with pass fail? How do they know?
Yeah. And that's kind of a hot topic right now in medical.
Oh, they know. Come on.
So there's USMLE Step 2, which also has a score associated with it, which historically hasn't mattered as much, but is becoming more and more important. So it's probably the Step 2 is just essentially going to be the new Step 1, probably.
So hold on. But so understand these 4 years, but before, I want to hear your journey a little bit into, you applied to medical schools. How'd that go? Applications, how much do they cost? What time is involved? What heartbreak is involved? I know it was a difficult journey for you, and I'm sure many out there.
Yes, sorry about that. So you apply to med school, you have to pay a couple of fees. The first fee you pay is to use the general application program. So that costs a certain fee, and you essentially in this program.
How much does it cost, Caleb? How much are we talking? Like a couple $100, $50 filing fee?
No, it was probably $300 to $400 from what I can remember.
Okay.
Been a little while. Actually, relatively little compared to the residency version of this.
So those of you keeping track of inflation, it's probably double now.
But that's just the primary application. So that website allows you to send out applications to all the schools except for Texas, which has their own.
Of course we do. You
Of
want to know
course.
why? Because we're Texas. That's why. You want to be a doctor in this state? You better come and bring everything you've got. You apply to Texas, you better not apply anywhere else. Texas.
Right. So if you want to apply
awesome.
to Texas schools, you got to do all this twice, actually.
Wow.
So
We're hardcore like that.
That program send out all the applications, and then you would start to get secondary applications. So that was if they're still interested in you after the first like round of screening. It's usually your scores, kind of where the school you came from.
A very high level, quick glance.
Yeah,
is what
very
we're
quick
talking.
screen.
Okay.
So you get a secondary application, and then that application usually costs $50 to $60. Now, depending on how many schools you wanted to apply to, if you had lower scores, and you weren't geographically restricted, you would apply to a whole lot of these.
You're shooting them out there. Give me a whole lot. How many are we thinking of applying to? How many did you apply to?
I applied to 35, I believe.
Okay.
So math, that's
50.
what?
If anyone wants to do that, like he can do his calculator there.
It's almost $2,000. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Because I remember spending almost as much on applications as I did on my MCAT preparation course, which was $2,000. So you spend that $2,000. So that's why I said the 300 or 400 actually was relatively not too much. So then, and this is just to apply. You pay this money to be able to send you the application. So you send them your application, and then you'll get one of 3 letters. And back when I was applying, it was actual letters and envelopes. And if it was a light, small letter, you knew what that, or envelope, you knew what that meant. And if it was a big packet, you knew what that meant. So you're always praying for the big packet. So within about 2 or 3 weeks, you start getting the answers. And to be honest, I did get rejected from all but one medical school that first round.
34 out of 35.
Yeah, and I got waitlisted on 3.
So give me a comparison because I'm sure you were talking to other of your pre-med students, right? Or colleagues. Hey, how many other people were seeing that type of a rejection, or even 50% rejection? Is that common?
Well, the people I was talking to were kind of those high functioning, like they felt bad if they got one rejection, like it was the end of the world for them.
Gotcha. Okay.
They were comparing acceptances, and I was like, oh my God.
I guess I'm trying to give an expectation.
Wait
If someone's listening to Dr. Epps on this podcast and going, I want to go to medical school, what can they expect? More than likely.
You can expect a way higher percentage of rejection than acceptances.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe 80-20 even. Like most of for the normal applicant, you're going to get a lot of rejections.
And this first round, where did you want to get in, and where did you end up getting accepted?
I wanted to get into anywhere. And I finally got accepted to Campbell University.
That was good.
It was a DO school, which we haven't even talked about DO and what that means. But essentially, there's medical doctor, MD, or doctor of osteopathy, DO. They do the exact same things. They just have a little bit different board certification process.
Credentials.
But in my mind, I really didn't want to be a DO. I wanted the MD, but I got accepted to it. And so I had that in my back pocket. And I'll never forget the day when I remember thinking, what went wrong? What was the worst part of my application? And it was my MCAT by far. So
what was your MCAT score?
So my very first MCAT score was a 23, which doesn't mean anything to anybody that would listen to this anymore because they've completely changed it. But it was low. It was very low.
What was it? What was that out? What was that out of it at the time?
It's out of 45. But no one. Probably your 99.9th percentile scores are like 38s. Like no one ever got close to 45. So essentially it was out of 38.
So you were average or below average?
It was below average, but I had felt that I had good enough. I had 2 research publications. I had really good jobs.
You had the journey. The journey.
Yeah. So I was kind of like, well, I think I actually got a decent application here, but then obviously I didn't. So at that point, I was like, okay, I can either go to this DO school in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina. It's in Bowie's Creek near Lillington, or I can try to take the MCAT again. And I decided to take the MCAT again. And the second time, and so my goal for the MCAT, I wanted a 32 because after talking to a lot of people, that seemed to be the one that you would definitely get into somewhere if you had a 32. So
what's the time space between the first and the second that you took?
That was 3 months. Yeah.
Okay.
I got a 29 the second time. Kind of devastated, but I was like, it's darn close. Like maybe.
How did you get better? How did you do so much? I mean, I know it's not what you wanted, but how did you do so much better? Yeah.
So I enrolled in that $2,000 course. I was like, okay, as far as what it takes, right? I was like, well, this is what it takes. I'm gonna have to pay this money. So I enrolled in a $2,000 course and actually had a tutor essentially. The first time around, I just did my own. I tried to do my own thing. So that 3 months I took that course, extremely intensive, pretty much all day, every day. I wasn't in any classes. I was just doing that for 10 hours a day for 3 months, and I got a way better score. But it still wasn't quite the score I wanted. So I took it a third time. I felt like I could do better.
And what was that gap?
Reading section. So that gap was about 4 weeks because they only offered it once a month. Took it the next time they offered it, and I got a 30. And I was like, okay, it's not a 32, but I'm into the 30s. And I felt like with that, I could do it.
How long is that MCAT test?
So again, the MCAT has changed quite a bit, but when I took it, it was just a 1-day, 8-hour exam, which, right. It seems long, but the USMLE step 1 that I told you about earlier, that's a 3-day exam.
Well, and I've taken some finance exams, like my Series 7. That one was like a 7-hour exam, and that was like, oh my gosh, you're right. You don't compared to a 3-day though. It's like that's a breeze. I mean, you put me in an exam for three days. I'm just going to quit on day 1.
Yeah. So it's relatively shorter, but still.
Which you've mentioned this a few times. I have to ask though. You keep saying like the MCAT's different than what it was when you were there. Scores, bar schools, how you get into schools, the pass, fail, the score, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Do you feel like medical standards are decreasing or just adapting, or are they increasing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they're adapting. I think it's very new process than when I was in it, starting in it 10 years ago. It's much more geared towards looking at the applicant as a whole. Like, I think I even got accepted my first round. Like if things were kind of how they are now, having been on myself now, some admission committees and resident applicant committees, like trying to interview applicants coming in.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we do a really good job at like looking at the whole person. Like for me, like what did you do for a job? Like if you worked at McDonald's where you had to show up at 8:00 and like deal with angry people,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's adapted, and I think it's adapted in a good way.
So test score isn't weighed as heavily.
I don't feel like it is. Now each school is going to have their arbitrary kind of first screen that we talked about.
Yeah.
However they measure that is still there.
That's got to be almost algorithm based, right?
Yeah. Like you I mean, there's so many applicants, you have to have some way of like doing it.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, sorry. So that was kind of I decided to not do that DO school. I decided to wait and reapply a year and use that year as a gap year to get a master's degree, which I feel like did help me in my second round of applications. But I would say for people doing it now, that gap year is becoming more and more, like I said, almost expected.
Standard.
Where you either do an advanced degree or you do like some really high-end research, or you do, some sort of medical mission trip for a year. Like it's becoming more and more. I guess what I should say is if you don't get into medical school right out of undergraduate, that's okay. And it's actually becoming more of the norm.
What would you do if you were in that scenario again? What would you do with that year? Would you do a master's again?
I would do the exact same thing. Yep.
Okay.
Again.
Master's, and it was in nutrition, right?
Yep. So it got me more research. It got me more letters of recommendation. It demonstrated to the medical schools that I could handle graduate level work.
Well, you went to a really good school too.
Ivy League.
Yeah. You went to Columbia, right?
Yep. So that helped.
Yeah.
It just showed them that I wasn't like that. One, I was committed. Like I'm going to do this. And two, that the coursework that is so rigorous in the first 2 years, I could handle. And so I think that was a big thing. I would definitely do that again.
Do they care about your master's GPA?
They didn't as much, which is unfortunate because I had a very good GPA and I graduated with honors actually. It's not quite as important. What's more important in the graduate school world is your research and who you did research with.
So that was the hard part of your master's degree, not necessarily school, but like the research and making sure you're being involved and doing stuff that show the resume.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
And we got into those 4 years. I don't know if there's anything you want to talk more about the med school, the actual part, the first 2 years. You talked about the second 4 years.
Yeah, I know we're running short on time, but yeah, briefly, you have those first 2 years are preclinical coursework. You're in classes, you're taking tests. And then the third and the fourth year are the fun years, the crazy years. So you're on different rotations. So just to give you an idea of how this works, you are assigned to, let's say, an internal medicine team in the hospital. There's a very, very specific hierarchy, and you know your place in that hierarchy. It goes attending,
all the time,
fellow, upper level resident, lower level resident, intern, usually somebody else, and then medical student. Somebody
else, that homeless guy on the street. See him? You're below him, Dr. Epps.
If he walks in and he joins your rounding that day, you are below that guy.
Okay.
So that's the hierarchy. So what you do is every morning you do what's called pre-rounding. So every morning, the whole team is going to go around to all the patients. You're going to talk about the plan. You're going to talk about how things are going. You're going to talk about what medicines you should change or take off or any procedures that need to happen. Before that, you have to go see the patient individually. However, as a medical student, the residents are also doing that, and they expect you to go in before them. And they get in at about 5 a.m. So what time do you have to show up? You have to show up about 4:30. So you would show up as a medical student at 4:30. You go knock on the patient's door who's had some horrific trauma or surgery or is feeling the worst of their life.
Wow.
You wake them up, say, "Hey, sir, I'm Caleb. I'm a medical student. How you feeling today?"
I'm a medical capital S on the student part here.
I just think about how mad I get at nurses when we've had 3 children and, we just get to sleep and one comes in. I just want to smack them. Yeah. So I can't imagine how these people feel with these pesky students coming.
They're like,
I felt
hello, want me to flip your pillow? And you're just like, oh my gosh.
Honestly, by my 4th year, I finally figured out I would just go in, I'd let them sleep, I'd look at their vitals, I'd listen to their heart, and just not even talk.
You figured it out. You figured out that little secret.
So then the resident comes in, and then maybe a fellow, if you have a fellow on this team, they'll come in, and then you all go in as a team together. And so that rounding process usually takes the whole morning. It's like from 8 to noon, but you've been there for a while writing notes and doing your pre-rounding and all this kind of stuff. And as a medical student, your job is to present the patient. So when you get to your patient, so-and-so is a 44-year-old male who came in with acute cholecystitis and a status post cholecystectomy. And so that's kind of why they're here. And, they've had a bump in their creatinine over the evening. We should probably look at their kidneys. Let's do a renal ultrasound. And the team will be like, yeah, okay. No, you're an idiot. We're not doing that. We're gonna do that. And that's how it goes.
What chart are you reading, Dr. Epps?
That's essentially how it goes for 2 years on a wide variety of services, a wide variety of specialty. And until the halfway through your 4th year, it's kind of like your senior year, right? And you've matched into your specialty. So I had matched into radiology at UNC. I knew what I was going to do. I knew where I was going. And so like a 4th year medical student in spring of their last year is just like completely worthless. So that's the second 2 years. And then you start residency and you start intern year, and the work goes up even more, and the hazing and embarrassment goes up even more. And
I was about to say, is it kind of standard protocol? Like when we went to elementary school in 5th grade, we were king, right? And then we went to 6th grade, we're back on the bottom. And then we go into 8th grade, and then go into high school in 9th grade, we're back on the bottom. Is it similar to that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as a 4th year medical student, you're king or queen, man. You've matched. You're going to be an orthopedic surgeon. You're going to be a neurosurgeon. You know where you're going. You don't care if the attending doesn't follow your plan, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what grade they give you. That's the other thing. So the 3rd and 4th year, your grades are determined by that attending. That attending will say he served an honors, or he got an adequate, or he got below average, or whatever. So a lot depends on your relationship with that attending.
And you talked about 4:30 a.m. to 12 were all based around, what was it called?
Rounding.
Rounding. Yeah. How much later did you stay after noon?
Yep. So oftentimes there was a second round in the afternoon on like more specialized, like the patients that we're really worried about, you'll go around to. You'll spend the time writing notes. You'll do presentations. You'll go to lectures. You'll have lunch. And then typically get out around 5:30 was the goal.
So that's 12, 13-hour days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, you're kind of king of the castle, queen of the castle, and then you become an intern, which I did my intern year in Atlanta, Georgia, and kind of starts all over. Except now you have a medical student under you, so you're feeling good. But then you still have a lot of work that you do, a lot of things to learn. Because once you become an intern, like people start calling you doctor. You have to start ordering things. People come to you when there's a problem. So I did, during my ICU time, I'd be the only doctor in the ICU overnight as a brand new graduate. And you start hearing alarms go off and you're like,
a lot of pressure.
God. Yeah. So tons of pressure. And I will say, I know we're running low on time.
No.
Well, I was going to say,
you take
so
as much time as you want.
I don't know how much time you have, but I'm good. Tom, you're good. I'm sure you're the one that's the most short on time.
Ice cream's waiting for me.
I'll just up a few more comments here.
No, you're okay. Hey, we try to stay within an hour, but you could take 2 hours. Keaton can leave.
I won't take 2 hours. But so we talked about undergrad. We talked about med school to the point. So now residency. So when the lay person says, "Hey, didn't you learn that in medical school?" Or didn't you? What they really mean is, didn't you learn that during residency or fellowship? Because it's truly in residency and fellowship that you actually learn how to become a doctor and you actually learn your craft and your specialty. So as you said, a lot of pressure, but honestly, that's where you learn it. So as an intern, you're kind of lowest again on the totem pole, but you are learning incredibly at an incredibly rapid pace because you're actually doing the things and you're actually seeing the consequence that has on patients and you're actually fixing things. So I learned so much during my
consequences and benefits, right?
Yeah. So I can't tell you how many times this patient would come into the hospital sick as stink, and within a few days they'd be out walking and discharged, and it's like it is a good feeling. It is a really good feeling. You have the opposite experiences, which I won't go too much into depth, but it's just this wild roller coaster of a year where you just learn a ton, and it's really. Like I said, it's you now have the pressure on you. You're now doing things, and those things are having consequences. And so that's where you learn, and that's why you learn so quickly. And it's for most people after that intern year, you'll go into your specialty. So if your specialty is family medicine, you'll just kind of keep doing that intern year stuff for 2 more years, and then you graduate. That specialty is emergency medicine. The intern year is kind of included in that as well. So that's only 3 years. But for anybody else, like your radiation oncologist, your ophthalmologist, dermatologist, radiologist, anesthesiologist, pathologist, some will do it even, you'll go just do your specialty. So I only had to do that really hard stuff for a year. And then I went into radiology residency. And I moved here to Chapel Hill to do that. And then it starts over. You're back again, lowest on the totem pole. So for radiology, you have that 1 year intern year, and then you have 4 years of radiology training. And you call it R1, R2, R3, R4. So I'm currently an R4, R4 chief. So I'm about as high on the totem pole as you can get finally. But then next year I'll be a fellow. And in fellowship, there's a 1 or 2 year option. So I'm actually going to be the lowest again on the totem pole for fellowship. But so you start off as your R1 year, and R1 year is very nice. And this is really nitty gritty, just radiology specific stuff. But
give it this.
R1 year is very nice. No one really expects anything out of you. You're really learning just a lot. You're just in the reading rooms. You're going through scans. You're trying to figure everything out. R2 year is the equivalent of your intern year, where you get put on call. So you're in the hospital by yourself. And
we've got this guy come in, broken leg. Now you need to run the machine. See all the buttons? Yeah. Good luck. Okay.
So as a radiologist, what you do is you actually sit in a room and you have a very nice computer setup. And there's actually technologists who are kind of like the nurses of the radiology world, and they get all the images, right? So they push the buttons, they position the patient, those images get sent to you, and then you generate a report saying fracture, no fracture, acute cholecystitis, nothing going on, nothing wrong. So you'll have about in a 1 night span, which is from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., you'll have about 150 studies. Those will include x-rays, but they'll also include CTs and MRIs of pretty much any body part you can think of. And it's largely people that are coming in from the ED. So those are going to be car crashes. Those are going to be like really bad cancers that come in, with complications. And you just got to read it all. So this R2, that's kind of like the intern equivalent, where it's like, okay, this is you. You're gonna send that patient to the OR by the words you say, or you're gonna send them home having missed something, and they're gonna have to come back here because they're almost dead.
Are you
That's
always
cute.
working the 8 to 8, like nighttime as an R2?
That's the highest concentration of those shifts are during your R2 year. Yeah.
Okay.
But again, that's where you learn. So one quick story that I love about this year for me and kind of accumulated my experience.
The R2 year.
The R2 year, yeah.
Okay.
So I get a phone call. It's like 2 or 3 in the morning. I get a phone call from a cop, and I don't know how he got the number. I don't know how like this all worked, but somehow he got our phone number. And he's like, "Hey doc, listen, we got this guy here. We're pretty sure he's possessing. Like, pretty sure he's got drugs somewhere on his body, but we can't find it." And we chased this guy in the neighborhood, and we saw it in his hands, and then it wasn't. But we're pretty sure he didn't have time to throw it anywhere because we were like watching him the whole time. They're like, "Is it in any of his any of his cavities, his body cavities?" I'm like, "Well, let me take a look." So
put him underneath the lights.
Yeah, do a CT scan of everything
For
from
sure.
head to toe, and sure enough, in his rectum was the bag.
Man,
said,
how did
"You
he get it up there so quick? That's crazy.
And that's the
I just imagine this guy running and hopping fences, and you're right, Keaton. Like the cop's like, he's a magician. He hopped that 10-foot fence, and when he got on the other side,
That's a
bag
real
is
skill,
gone.
yeah.
The bag is gone. And the shovel.
He threw whatever he had, and he already had put that up there. So that was my
okay.
But
okay.
That was your guess. Dr. Epps' professional analysis, he had 2 bags.
And I'm like, listen, man, like I'm a brand new radiologist. I don't know what this should look like. It could be poop, or it could be like stick your finger up, figure it out. And he's like, "Oh, okay, that gives us a great place to start." And he does. And there's a bag of drugs in there, and he gets arrested. So
so what would it mean? Like they tell him like, "Okay, you got to pull the bag out. We know it's up there."
Well, I don't know what they did after that. But
okay. I'm like,
I moved on to the next case. That's the good. You just move on to the next case.
Next.
But my words had enough power to send a man to jail that night. And so that was just kind of a more humorous one. Really, you're trying to figure out: do they need to get admitted? Do they have to go to the OR? Or are they safe to discharge? And that's
what's the wildest one you've seen?
Oh man. So one I saw recently was this guy came in with a little belly pain. That was literally the quote we got. He had a little belly pain. And so we do the CT scan, we're looking through it. And in a belly, air should only be in a few spots, right? Air should only really be in the bowel because, you open here and open there. And so that's where the air should be. There shouldn't be any air outside the confines of the bowel. I was like, man, there's a little locule of gas here. And I think that means he perfed something. And so the surgeon called me really upset because they don't want to take them to the OR. The surgeons don't want to come in, and they're relying on this, our whatever resident who's in training to say these things. And I'm like, no, I think he does. I think he's got a little perforation here. And he's like, all right, I'm coming in. And like, here it goes. And so for that I guess why this is wild is that whole night I was just on nails, like wondering if I was right and if I was about to get chewed out big time.
If you were about to owe a surgeon, dinner or something.
I was so freaked out because I also kind of know this surgeon, and they are very strong-willed, and they would have made a big stink. But lo and behold, I was right. Like he found this little perf in the small bowel, and he called me up. Wow. He was like, "Hey, got it?" And I was like, "Oh, thank you." I was like, "Oh yeah." I knew that's what it was. Anyway, it was like an interaction that I didn't expect to. I didn't expect that kind of pressure. I thought radiology was gonna be easy. You look at scans, but like that's.
But that was that's in your R4 year that happened.
That was in my R4 year, so that was a very
which you're 4 years into looking at scans and looking over things, and you're still like,
exactly. Yeah.
I am on pins and needles here, hoping that I'm right. Right.
Exactly.
Just to say, goes to the complexity of the job, right? That exactly. You don't know what you're going to see.
Exactly.
Wow, that's cool.
I think and we didn't get to this, and I don't think we're going to have time this one. We might have to have a part 2.
We have time.
The finances of it all. We talked about a little bit about applications and everything, but I mean, do you have a total ballpark number of?
Yeah. And you can public information. You can look up the average medical school debt. So essentially, the average medical student comes out of medical school with about $300,000 of debt. In residency, you get a graded salary, but you start off about 55,000 and you really only go up to about 80,000 at most if you're like a PGY 7, right? So most people get paid nothing more than like 63 or 64,000. So if you meet a resident who's a physician, do not assume they are just rolling in wealth. And it's really scary, but a lot of these family medicine docs or emergency medicine docs can come out of training, come out of residency, and only make about $200,000, which does sound like a lot. But when you have, more than that plus a third of debt with interest, when interest runs about 6.7, 6.8% from the government right now, that's going to take a long time to pay off.
And family, you've developed a family in this time, and probably a lot of people because
3 children,
however many years. Yeah, so there's expenses rack up.
So as far as what it takes, most people have to take out loans. There are exceptions, but most people take out loans, and most of those loans are usually the federal government. It's the same loans that people take out for undergrad or at school. It's just a lot more.
The only exceptions I can think of, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but are military and rich wealth, our family, generational wealth.
Yeah, personal wealth, military, and MD PhDs. So you can do a combined MD PhD where you do 3 years of research in between all that medical school stuff we were talking about. So it's 7 years total, but you get a stipend throughout that whole time. So those people come out if they have any debts. Extremely.
But no real like medical school scholarships. Like, hey, I'm on a full ride for my medical school.
There are.
They're like the 0.01%.
Nobody like me is going to get those.
the average and the 99% are not. Okay.
Yeah. So as far as what it takes financially, it's a lot. The payout can be huge depending on the specialty and the job practice you are. I will say radiology is fortunately one of the few specialties left in the country right now that's making money. Imaging is just exploding because everybody has to have it. And doctors are becoming worse at the physical exam. So
it's advancing, right? Scanning's advancing too. So.
Yep. So radiology is fortunately doing very well. And our personal situation will be fine, even with that much debt plus some. But yeah, so that's kind of what it takes financially. It's a big commitment. And if you don't come out of that either having made it to the end or having actually not a great paying job, it's a long road to pay off.
So you definitely got to take stock and thought of what you want to do versus what pays and makes it worth it. Yeah.
Well, and this might roll into a part 2 because I'd love to do a part 2 to talk about those finances because as we interview more people, Dr. Epps, what we want to do is ask them like, what was the application process and what did it look like, right? How hard was it? What did they stipend? Anyways, let me peel back your heart a little bit. How was it for your wife in medical school? What can wives expect from a medical school? Because you spouses, yeah, sure, be politically correct.
Yeah, come
on. Well, I
Tom.
guess a woman could be a doctor, right?
I've heard statistics that more are entering in than
more are. But what I'd say is for a spouse, thank you, Keaton.
No, yeah,
first, okay. No, I get what you're saying. But for a spouse, what does it take for a spouse to support a medical student?
Yeah. A lot. So I guess how I could frame this is whenever I talk about medical school or residency, it's always in the context of we. It's like, oh, we went to medical school at UNC, or we go to residency Chapel Hill. Like it's a team sport. For example, this last week I was on nights, so I did the 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. for 7 nights in a row, and slept during the day. And she had to take all the kids to different schools. She had to pick everybody up. She had to take them to doctor's appointments and feed them and bathe them and just go on and on and on. I can't. The support of the significant other is extremely important. And I guess another part of that is how do you date during medical school? That's a whole nother. And I saw plenty of my friends do that. And I'll say the short answer of that is you end up dating other doctors.
just get married before medical school.
So the TV shows are real because they all date each other.
TV shows are sort of real.
Like Grey's Anatomy. Yes.
So yeah, I was going to ask, because that was one fun question I wanted to have. Grey's Anatomy, New Amsterdam, House. What's the most realistic one in relation to your experience you've seen out there?
I'll throw another one in there, Scrubs.
Scrubs. Okay.
I don't know if you've seen that. So
Oh yeah, hilarious. Yeah.
yeah. So the first season of both Grey's Anatomy and Scrubs is their intern year, and that's extremely accurate.
Really?
Good to know.
So if you ever want to know what intern year is like, especially that first season of Scrubs, that night when he's just given the pager and all of a sudden it turns to 8 p.m. and he's just looking around like waiting. That's so accurate. I say Grey's Anatomy becomes less and less accurate as the seasons go on, particularly in the field of radiology. You never see a radiologist on that field. All the surgeons go in and do their own scans. They all read their own scan. Like, that's not how it works. Like, radiologist reads the scans and calls you up and says, hey, this is what's going on. But yeah, I'd say those first seasons of those two shows, House is extremely unrealistic. Their team
but
does
awesome.
yeah, but awesome. Yes. Their team does everything. They do like brain surgery and interventional radiology and their internal medicine docs. And they like go to people's apartments to find the, pigeon.
Like, too bad that's my favorite one. I love that one.
So your House is cool, but a little unrealistic.
They're the elite crisis team. That's what they are.
Yeah. New Amsterdam, I think I think they do an okay job at highlighting kind of the business of a hospital and how that actually pressures like a lot of decisions that are made. But the actual medicine's maybe not quite as accurate. And then what was the other one?
Good Doctor is out. I didn't mention that, but
Good Doctor is extremely unrealistic in the fact that they have like 2 patients that they see. It's like they per episode maybe 2 patients, and they can spend all their time and their effort.
Yeah.
It's like, man, you have like 40 patients that you're running around trying to like make sure they're not dying, and hey, let's try to get them better too. So that part's a little unrealistic about Good Doctor. Everything's like nice and clean and up to date and state of the art, and it's like, man, hospitals are kind of dirty places.
Well, we are so appreciative of your time. I don't want to take up more time, but thank you so much. Obviously, just diving into this podcast a little bit shows how valuable time is to you. So thank you for spending almost an hour and a half with us. What parting words or wisdom would you leave to anybody looking to enter into the medical field? Because I can tell you, I've never been more certain I made the right decision in not going into the medical field after this hour and a half than I've ever been before.
The parting advice I would say is that you can do it. There are lots of ways to become a doctor. Like we just mentioned the DO path briefly. There's medical schools in the Caribbean that I know friends that went to they're easier to get into, a little more expensive. There's so many paths to becoming a doctor that if you really want it, and if you are have that desire, you can do it. It might take a little longer. It might take, a zigzag path as opposed to a straight path right after graduate school, or undergrad, but you can do it. And in fact, those are the kind of doctors we need more of, right? We don't need the doctors that just sailed through undergrad, had a 4.0, didn't live in the real world, didn't do any research, didn't deal with patients. We actually don't need as many of those. We need the doctors that are actually care about people, actually really want this so bad that they are willing to, put in the time, money, and effort to make it happen. So that'd be my advice.
The theme of our show so far has been grit, and I think that'll continue. And I think that's what you're speaking to there. The ones that have the most grit end up being the most successful in whatever category they might be in this turn, the medical field. Thank you so much. I love some of the nitty gritty we got to. I think, like we already mentioned, we got to do a second episode sometime, maybe down the road, and after you finish your fellowship or something, we'll have to dive in more.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Epps. Thanks, man.
Thank you for having me.
Dawson, hit it.